The last person who hurt you probably didn't look like a threat. The most dangerous people you'll ever meet won't raise their voice. They won't yell, break things, or wear warning signs. They'll smile, they'll make you laugh, they'll make you feel seen in a way that disarms your doubt. And when they're gone, you won't just question them, you'll question yourself, because real manipulation doesn't feel like danger, it feels like safety. Until it doesn't. They don't walk in with control, they earn it. They create it. They craft a version of themselves that feels like the answer to something you didn't even know you were asking. But answers can be illusions. A mirage still looks like water when you're thirsty enough. And the moment you start to trust that version, they start rewriting your reality. This is the most overlooked form of harm, the one that wears charm instead of force. The one that earns your loyalty before it ever takes your boundaries. You won't notice the shift until it's already in motion. One day you're laughing at their jokes. The next you're hesitating before speaking. You're explaining your tone, you're shrinking. And you can't remember when that started, but it started with a mask. We don't show the world who we are. We show them what we believe will be accepted. That's the persona, the curated identity. The version of you designed to win approval, avoid rejection, or feel safe in rooms that once made you small. Carl Jung called it necessary. He knew we need it to survive. But he also knew that when the mask becomes our identity, we forget how to breathe without it. You learn to smile before you speak, to nod even when you disagree, to soften your truth so you won't be seen as too much, too needy, too difficult. And over time, something terrifying happens. The mask begins to feel more real than what's underneath. You don't just wear it, you become it. And when someone praises that version of you, it feels like love. But it's not love, it's reinforcement. So you keep performing, you keep pleasing, you keep being who they want you to be until you're exhausted and empty and unsure why nothing feels real. That's the danger of the persona. It doesn't lie outright, it edits, it doesn't scream, it whispers, it tells you to stay agreeable, to stay likable, to stay quiet. And while it's doing that, someone else is watching. Someone who knows how to build a mask better than you do. They don't wear it to be accepted. They wear it to gain access to you, to your trust, to your vulnerabilities. They become exactly what you've been conditioned to want. Think about the person who texts you good morning every day until you need something. The coworker who flatters you until there's a promotion. The friend who mirrors you perfectly and later uses your words against you. It doesn't feel fake. It feels familiar, but that's what makes it dangerous. You've been taught to recognize threats that look like monsters, not threats that look like miracles. So when someone shows up polished, intentional, and perfectly aligned with your emotional gaps, you lean in, you let them closer, you rationalize red flags, you call your gut overthinking. And that's when they start rewriting the rules. They test your limits in small ways. They withhold affection to see how much you'll chase. They flip blame so subtly you start apologizing for your own clarity. And by the time the mask starts to crack, you're already invested in the story. Here's the question you need to ask. If their persona is a performance, what role are you playing in it? Because every mask needs an audience. And the moment you stop clapping, the show starts to fall apart. You've probably told yourself, I'm not like them, that you'd never manipulate, that you'd never betray, that you'd never lie to someone you love. But what if you already have, and just didn't notice? What if manipulation doesn't always look like control, but like survival? What if it looks like staying quiet to avoid rejection, smiling when you're seething, saying yes to avoid being left? What if the lie isn't what you told someone else, but what you told yourself to stay acceptable? Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of you you've been told not to be. The part that still exists, silently influencing your decisions from the corners of your awareness. The shadow isn't evil, it's exiled. It's your anger, repackaged as politeness, your fear, dressed up as control, your desire, softened into sacrifice. And it leaks out when your mask gets tired. You pride yourself on being generous, but silently resent how much you give. You say you hate drama, but somehow you're always orbiting it. You think you're peaceful, but explode the moment you're pushed. That's not failure. That's your shadow asking to be seen. because the parts of you that don't get air don't disappear. They fester, and the longer you ignore them, the more power they have over you. But here's where it gets dangerous. While you're busy hiding your mess, someone else is watching it, not judging it, but calculating how to use it. Manipulators don't need to create your wounds, they just need to find them. They look for what you've denied, and then they present themselves as the cure. They don't offer truth, they offer relief. Relief from your loneliness, relief from your doubt, relief from the exhaustion of pretending to be fine. And because you've been trained to deny your needs, you cling to the person who finally gives them permission to exist. You don't fall in love, you fall into imbalance, you call it connection. But it's choreography. They flatter the persona, they soothe the shadow, and in doing so they win your trust, not by being real, but by reflecting back the version of you that never felt allowed. And once you trust them, you begin to shrink for them. You edit your tone, you avoid conflict, you tell yourself it's love because it once felt like safety. But it's not love, it's survival in disguise, and this is how the performance sustains itself. You hide your truth to protect their illusion, and one day you wake up completely disconnected from your own voice, because you've spent so long translating your truth through someone else's comfort. But that was never love. That was self-abandonment. And the way out isn't confrontation, it's integration. You stop waiting for them to validate your worth and start acknowledging your shadow. You start telling the truth you were taught to hide, that you need, that you feel, that you see clearly now, and something shifts, because when your shadow is no longer a secret, no one can use it as leverage. You stop being flattered by breadcrumbs, you stop chasing closure, you stop mistaking chemistry for clarity. And suddenly the performance doesn't work anymore, because the audience has left the stage. Not every villain enters your life with cruelty. Some walk in gently, with a compliment, a shared laugh, a carefully timed vulnerability that feels like fate. But they're not opening up to bond. They're revealing just enough to earn your trust. Manipulators don't force their way into your life. They invite themselves in, disguised as everything you've ever wanted. And the first thing they do is listen, not to understand you, but to map you. They study the gaps in your boundaries, the parts of you that are still healing, the fears you only hint at when you think no one's watching. Then they build a persona tailored to those fractures, not a mask for everyone, a mask just for you. They become the calm in your chaos, the attention in your neglect, the understanding you didn't think you deserved. And because it feels like safety, you start opening the doors, you lower your guard, you share your story, and before you know it, you've handed them the keys to your emotional system. That's when the choreography begins. They push just slightly beyond your boundary, then reward you for not protesting. They disappoint you, then drip just enough charm to reset your expectations. They twist the narrative, then act hurt when you hesitate to believe them. And each time, you make a small compromise to keep the peace. You convince yourself they didn't mean it. You make excuses for their inconsistency. You downplay your instincts because you're still chasing the high of the version they showed you at the start. But that version never existed. It was architecture, not affection. And the moment you start asking for more than they're willing to maintain, the mask begins to crack. That's when the guilt begins. Suddenly, you're the problem. You're too demanding, too emotional, too hard to please. You're just not convenient anymore. And now that you've stepped out of the role, they start treating you like a threat. This isn't a theory, it's a pattern. It's what Cassie Chadwick did when she convinced America's wealthiest men she was Andrew Carnegie's secret heir. She forged papers, dropped names, projected status. She didn't force them to believe her, she made them feel special for being let in on the secret. Or take Clark Rockefeller, a man with no real wealth, no real identity, but enough charm and composure to convince elite circles he belonged. He didn't overpower people, he mirrored what they respected. And they believed him because it reinforced the story they wanted to tell themselves. Manipulation doesn't need to look like abuse, it just needs to feel familiar enough to bypass suspicion. And when it's finally exposed, the world still believes the mask, because the performance was always better than your truth. So you're left alone, doubting your memory while they're praised for their charisma. And maybe you're thinking of someone right now, the one who made you feel safe at first, the one who made you feel chosen, the one who pulled away the moment you needed more than what served their image. You believed in their love, but it wasn't love. It was leverage, dressed in affection, and that's what they never expected you to say out loud, that it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was realizing how much of yourself you gave to keep the performance going. But here's the shift. You stop trying to unmask them. You unmask yourself. You look at the version of you that tolerated the performance, not because you were weak, but because you were kind, because you believed in repair, because you hoped your consistency would inspire theirs. But it didn't, because the mask was never accidental. It was necessary, not for connection, but for control. And once you see that clearly, you don't need revenge. You don't need closure. You need distance. You need truth. You need the version of you that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in micro glitches, a sentence that doesn't match what they said last week, a delayed reaction, a strange look in their eyes that lingers too long after you ask a simple question. You feel it, you register it, and then you override it, because that's what they've trained you to do. Doubt yourself before you ever doubt them. They laugh it off, or cry, or turn it into a moment about your mood, so you retreat, you apologize. You try to be easier, quieter, smaller, but your nervous system never lies, and it knows when something doesn't line up. Over time, those micro-glitches stack up, and the version of them you fell for, the one who once felt so certain, starts to shimmer like a glitch in the code. You begin to realize this wasn't a relationship. It was a role, and your job wasn't to be known. It was to be manageable, predictable, adaptable to the shape of their needs. At first you wonder if you're overthinking, then you wonder if you're losing yourself, and then something shifts. You see the mask slip one too many times, and instead of twisting yourself into a new version to keep them close, you stop. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop editing your tone. You stop blaming yourself for their silence. And what fills that silence is something they didn't expect: clarity. Let's pause here, because this is where people start to drop off. Not from the video, from the truth, because seeing the pattern means you can't pretend you don't anymore. And seeing it doesn't just change how you look at them, it changes how you look at you. You realize that the hardest part wasn't the manipulation, it was what you did to yourself to maintain the illusion, how you made yourself easier to love, how you over-explained, how you tried to earn back closeness you never should have had to work for. You weren't just trying to be loved by them, you were trying to redeem yourself for needs you were told to feel ashamed of. You didn't fail the test, you were tricked into believing love was something you had to pass. And the moment you see that, really see it, you stop asking for closure. You stop needing their version of the story. You stop chasing an ending that makes sense of their behavior, because you finally understand that the apology isn't coming, the self-awareness isn't coming. And most importantly, they are not coming. The performance is over, the mask has slipped. And you're still standing, still whole. Even if bruised, still breathing, even if shaken, because somewhere in the fallout you found something real. Not their approval, not their attention, yourself. The mask doesn't fall with a crash, it crumbles. One fragment at a time, it dissolves in silence, in moments where the charm no longer works, in sentences that once soothed now ring hollow, in the echo of your own voice asking, how did I miss it? And then it hits you. You weren't just deceived by them, you were also deceiving yourself. You didn't just fall for their performance. You edited your own truth to make their version of love feel real. You became easier to handle. You smiled through discomfort. You forgave things you hadn't even processed yet. Not because you're naive, but because you were conditioned to think peace was earned through self-abandonment. That's where your healing begins, not by labeling them as toxic, but by seeing where you became silent. Because the most powerful moment in any story of manipulation isn't when the mask falls from their face. It's when you stop wearing yours. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and now you see it. The darkness wasn't just in them. It was in every moment you believed your needs were too much. Every time you called your gut overthinking. Every time you apologized for feeling, but you're not broken. You were just trapped in someone else's narrative. And when you finally exit the story, you realize something brutal and beautiful all at once. You don't miss them. You miss the version of yourself that believed love meant sacrificing truth. You miss the hope that if you just showed up better, more gently, more perfectly, they would finally meet you at your depth, but they didn't want depth. They wanted control. And the only way to win that game is to stop playing it. So you walk, not with bitterness, not with rage, with clarity. You walk with the knowledge that being hard to love is often just code for hard to manipulate. You stop apologizing for your intensity, for your boundaries, for your emotional intelligence that sees through the script. You stop performing, you start living, and this time, without the mask, you speak up even if your voice shakes. You set limits, even if they leave. You own your shadow, so no one else can use it against you. You build a life not based on how others perceive you, but on how deeply you know yourself. That's wholeness, not the curated version, not the polished act, but the real thing. The kind of wholeness that no longer fears rejection because it no longer relies on pretending. And if this unmasked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to the version of you who needed it 5 years ago, or to someone still trying to love someone who only ever gave them a role to play. And if you're still wearing a mask, maybe it's time to take it off. Subscribe if you're ready, because this was only the first unmasking.